fight for that. But I don't want to take any more time because I want to have Larry come. If you do not know him, this is Larry Foley from the University of Arkansas. As I say, he's an Emmy Award winner for his films, and we're so glad to have him here today.
Well, thank you, Judy, for having me. This thing on? You can hear me fine, can't you? I mean, I was telling Judy, I think I project pretty well. Old public address announcer. Let me tell you a little bit about this particular film. This is one that I wanted to do. I'm a big baseball fan, but in my career that spans about 40 plus years now, I'd never done a baseball film. And I heard a little bit about the Hot Springs Historic Baseball Trail, but I didn't know a lot about it, and I'd read a few things, paid a little attention to perhaps baseball spring training was once played there. And I took my grandson a few years down to actually did a series one Saturday of some of my films at the Hot Springs Library, and I took one of my grandsons with me, Christian, who's a baseball player, and I said, let's go and look at some of these historic markers. So we drove around, and I began thinking about it for a couple of years. This might be a really fun and interesting story. And here's what I found out. Baseball spring training caught on in Hot Springs. Teams would train in warehouses or when the weather was warming up in places like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Chicago, but it wasn't always warm in March. And so the idea was that they would take a team south. And I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about it because you're about to see it. And so that's where the idea came from. A couple of things that I wanted to do when I launched into this particular project. I'm always attracted to stories that are interesting, but for whatever reason have escaped general knowledge. Those are the ones that I like to tell. And I think this one falls into that category. And I think you'll find that out. Early on, I knew who I wanted as my narrator. I wanted Billy Bob Thornton. And I got Billy Bob Thornton. So let me tell you a little Arkansas story about how people ask me, how'd you get Billy Bob Thornton? Well, Arkansas is one small town. And so I called my friend Courtney Pledger, who runs the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival. She'd been in the movie business for years. And I said, Courtney, do you know Billy Bob? I said, I do know Billy Bob, but I'll tell you who really knows Billy Bob is Harry Thomason. You know who Harry Thomason is. And Linda Bloodworth did Evening Shade, and they've done a lot of other things. Billy owes his entire career to Harry. Do you know Harry? And I said, I know Harry a little bit. I've met Harry. I'm not sure if he knows who I am or not. He says, well, let me talk to Harry. So Courtney talked to Harry, and Harry said, well, I know Larry. Let me talk to Billy. I bet he'd like to do it. This is how it went. So Harry talked to Billy. Billy said, yeah, I want to do it. I love baseball. Billy grew up in Malvern, was born in Hot Springs in 1955. The last year, a Negro League team trained in Hot Springs, the Detroit Stars. He was a very good baseball player. He had a tryout for the Kansas City A's. And while at that tryout, an errant ball flew and hit him in the collarbone and broke it, and thus ended his pitching career. So he became an Academy Award-winning actor and the voice of The First Boys' Friend. Also very early on, I wanted to see, I thought this is a national story, certainly set in Arkansas. And if you know my work, you know that I do a lot of Arkansas stories, but I always try to think about how we can present ourselves to the nation in a favorable way. Because let's face it, we're not always presented so favorably. And I've always thought, since that the 25th state is a pretty cool place to be from, and let's celebrate who we are and our heritage and legacy, and this is my latest attempt at that. It was a great deal of fun to work on this piece. One other goal that I had was, I did think it was a national piece, but even though I have PBS credits, I really didn't think that PBS was my target audience. I thought MLB Network, Major League Baseball Network, let me see if I can get them interested. And so I sent a couple of people a link saying, here it is. Didn't hear back. So I sent a little chippy email response that said, "I know you're busy, I get it. All I'm asking you to do is click on the link. I think you're going to like this show." The next day I had 2 people get in touch with me. They loved it, and it premieres nationally Saturday at 5 p.m. on MLB Network. Pretty cool, don't you think? So what I thought we would do, we can't watch all of it. I do have some DVDs. I was told today that they're also now for sale at the bookstore. They're on the edge of campus. UA Press has it, and I did bring a few, donated one to the library. Well, let's just look a little bit of it, and at some point in time I may stop and take some Q&A. That sound good? Any questions before we get started?
Is it 5 a.m. or 5 p.m.?
5 p.m. I wouldn't have let them have it if it had been 5 a.m. It's really good timing here because I guess I'll tell you one more thing before we play. Next week, pitchers and catchers report to Florida and Arizona for the beginning of spring training. Now, where did that tradition begin? Well, you'll find out that baseball spring training began in Hot Springs. But pitchers and catchers reporting 2 to 3 weeks early, that started in Hot Springs even after the heyday of spring training had left, because Hot Springs is just kind of cold sometimes in the year. But what would happen is that to get the full impact of those therapeutic mineral baths that the pitchers believed in, that got them ready for the season and loosened up those bones and muscles, you had to take 1 bath a day for 3 weeks. Thus, pitchers and catchers continue to report to spring training 3 weeks early. That's where it began. Well, let's watch a little.
No one really knows when or where the first baseball game was played or who invented the game. Maybe it truly was Abner Doubleday here in the village of Cooperstown, New York in 1839. Or so goes the legend. Baseball grew up after the Civil War, becoming the national pastime. And it remains today an American obsession for those who once played the game and wished they still could. The earliest professional teams began searching for a way to knock off the rust from winters of sedentary indulgence. This inspired an annual rite known as spring training, which caught on in the Arkansas resort town of Hot Springs. From the 1880s through the early part of the 20th century, the best who ever played the game came to work on their hitting and pitching and fielding in preparation for long seasons ahead, with such teams as the Dodgers and Red Sox, and the Monarchs and Crawfords and Grays. They were the first boys of spring, and this is their story.
Unveil those things. All right, stand the man. And word went out that here's a great place to not only play baseball, but perhaps most importantly, get in physical condition to have a successful season.
Ownership felt they needed to boil out the alcoholic microbes. Hot Springs was known as a place that had therapeutic waters, and they came for that reason. And then the ball players turned out to love it because they really not only did get in shape, but they had a great time. These were the greatest players at the peak of their greatness, all gathering in the same small town. So you would have Hannus Wagner, Babe Ruth, Trish Speaker, Cy Young. All these guys would be together in the same nightclubs, the gambling casinos, the ball fields.
The history is real here. We don't have to try to manufacture anything, dramatize anything, exaggerate anything. History is played right here.
Every big leaguer and his wife should teach their children to pray. God bless Mommy, God bless Daddy, and God bless Babe Ruth. Wait hoyt.
Hot Springs was a mixture of the bawdy and the elegant. The tubs at Bathhouse Row attracted visitors from around the country, the healing waters bringing a relief for arthritis or rheumatism or other discomforts long before drugs had been concocted to do the job. The horse races, the illicit casinos, the women of leisure, the mixed cocktails gave the visitors something to do when they were feeling better from their treatments. Lee Montville.
In March of 1918, George Herman Ruth was in Hot Springs, staying at the Majestic Hotel and working out with the Boston Red Sox at Whittington Park, their spring training field. It was his 4th spring at the Arkansas Spa, a place that offered everything he loved: baseball and golf, and gambling and carousing. Lee Montville, author of The Big Bam, The Life and Times of Babe Ruth, writes that Ruth was a perpetual conventioneer on the prowl.
I wish that the team still trained in places like that, where they have brothels and horse racing and gambling and everything. I think he got into all of it. I think he just went crazy.
It was here at Boston's Fenway Park where Ruth made his major league debut, a season before his first spring in Arkansas.
When Babe Ruth started training in Hot Springs, Arkansas, in his early years with the Red Sox, he was just a wild, untamed guy. He'd grown up in Baltimore, Maryland, at the St. Mary's Industrial School for the boys, and when he came out of there, he was like just Hercules Unchained. The whole world was out there to take a big bite of, and he just never stopped biting. 1918 was a pivotal year for Ruth. Jidge, as his friends called him, was 23, already one of the dominant left-handed pitchers in the game. He could throw a fastball by anyone, but he could also hit, and he began to lobby management to be in the lineup every game, even when he wasn't on the mound. He started clubbing so many balls out of Whittington Park in batting practice that owner Harry Frazee fined him $10 for lost baseballs. Babe's response? They ought to make these parks bigger. On St. Patrick's Day, in the first game of the spring, Ruth hit a home run over the center field wall that was last seen headed for the Reptile House across the street. A week later, in the 3rd inning of a game at Brooklyn, the Babe crushed a grand slam off right-hander Al Mamaw that might still be the farthest a baseball has ever been hit.
Right here, left side of home plate, and hit a ball that landed on the fly over 500 feet away in the Arkansas Alligator Farm.
The very first ball pitch just suited Babe, and he put his whole weight behind the drop. The sphere cleared the fence by about 200 feet and dropped into the pond beside the Alligator Farm, while the spectators yelled with amazement. Paul H. Shannon, Boston Post, March 25th, 1918.
That might be the best point to pinpoint too, is the pitcher's mound.
So how far did Ruth's ball travel? To discover the answer, B&F Engineering was hired to investigate.
Look how good it sits in there.
Using eyewitness accounts, an old aerial photograph, and modern surveying equipment, they determined the original location of home plate.
Right there?
Right there it is.
That's home plate.
You got it?
Yep, got it.
Along with landmarks that exist today as they did in the Babe's time, including Whittington Avenue and the Gator Farm and Petting Zoo that opened in 1902, still in business at the same address.
What we went back to was a 1965 aerial photograph before this parking lot existed here in the back of Weyerhaeuser, and we were able to geo-reference that, and you can actually see the diamond shape of the baseball field. There were remnants of the field still here, and most certainly the pitcher's mound home plate area, and also the back of the grandstands. All right. I'm getting the location.
The distance was measured from home plate to a pond where alligators still swim.
Once we knew the location of home plate and were able to measure its location, we then went to just right in the middle of the alligator pond itself and took the measurement. And at that point, we knew how far the home run was. 573 feet.
Man, I can't imagine hitting a shot like that on this fence. These ponds have been here forever.
In an era before weight training and performance-enhancing drugs, it seems implausible, if not impossible, to fathom a ball player from any era hitting a ball 573 feet. But remember, he was Babe Ruth, and his teammate Joe Dugan once said, to understand him, you had to understand this. He wasn't human.
But the Babe, when he was in the orphanage at St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, his hero was a big priest who would hit these fungo shots up in the air for the boys to catch the fly balls. And he would hit the ball very high, and he swung upwards to hit the fungos. He was the Babe's model. And the Babe had a big kind of what turned out to be a home run swing.
I've often been asked the difference between a baseball swing and a golf swing. Now you watch me, I'll show you.
Oh boy, he was a good golfer. He could hit that thing a mile, they say. And he went up to the Hot Springs Country Club a lot. And he would play 2 and 3 rounds a day sometimes.
The follow-through in both is exactly alike.
When Ruth would come here, he would hike the trails. He would take the baths. He did that, and he did it very seriously. Played a lot of golf. Would like to go to the horse races, but during the day, he would work very hard.
Photographs of Babe Ruth have started turning up over and over again in Hot Springs through the years and showing him really enjoying life. He would go out early in the morning to Oaklawn Park, the thoroughbred track, and he would run around the oval at the track.
After Ruth was sold to the Yankees following the 1919 season, he continued to visit Hot Springs prior to joining his New York teammates in Florida. In 1922, he settled a salary dispute by a coin flip in the lobby of the Eastman Hotel. The team owner tossed a $50 piece in the air. Babe called tails, and when it landed Ruth's way, he'd secured a 3-year deal worth $1,000 a week, with a bonus of $500 for each home run.
The Yankees did not train there, but he trained there, and a bunch of ball players went there as like a pre-spring training session. A lot of them would go to Hot Springs before they'd even go to spring training to lose some weight. And that was the idea with the Babe.
In 1925, Babe Ruth showed up in Arkansas, fat and ready for fun.
He ate, he drank, he gambled, he partied.
After the baths, he would be so ready to go into town to get to the nightlife. He would skip the cold shower at the end of the bath and just throw on some clothes and just go. So his pores would be wide open and the nights would be a little cool. And invariably, he'd wind up with a bad cold, an influenza or something.
Yankee management heard the Babe was living large and ordered their franchise slugger to leave town. Soon he was stricken with what became known as the bellyache heard round the world and missed the first half of the season.
Babe was Babe, and he tended to get into a little too much trouble here.
The Yankees made sure he would never again be seduced by the preseason temptations in Hot Springs.
Babe Ruth became the biggest money generator in baseball. When he joined the Yankees, the new ownership wanted to get him out of Hot Springs. He was just having too good a time.
Through the high windows, the sunlight enters and pierces the curling masses of vapor which rise slowly in the heavy air. A man becomes a creature of 3 conditions. He's about to take a bath. He is taking a bath. He has taken a bath. Stephen Crane, Hot Springs, Arkansas, 1895.
Hot Hot Springs became a national reservation in 1832 and still operates as a national park. In the 1870s, passenger trains began delivering vacationers. Opulent hotels and bathhouses were built to funnel steaming mineral water that escaped from the rocks into soothing hydrotherapy. But the streets were not paved, and the location was isolated in a valley amidst the hills of Arkansas. A New York Times reporter visiting in the 1880s wrote that Hot Springs had so many good points counteracted by so many bad points that he could have described the place as either the banner town of America or the worst hole in the world. Liz Robbins is director of the local historical society.
The springs were the reason for our existence and for our booming. In fact, a lot of the magazines and advertisements of the time called us Nature's Sanitarium.
Aristocrats and gamblers came on holiday. African American men found seasonal jobs as waiters, bellhops, and masseurs. As the young sport of baseball grew in popularity, some of the hotels sponsored teams for black ball players. All this caught the attention of the owner of the top professional team in the land, Al Spalding of the Chicago White Stockings, and his player-manager, Cap Anson. Chicago had a championship club, but during the off-season, the boys partied hard, ravaging their athletic bodies with whiskey.
Players of that time were really, for the most part, pretty rough characters. They were minimally educated, and drinking was a real problem.
They had their nights off, and they would find their way to the local saloon and do what was considered the manly thing, which was drink themselves silly.
Hot Springs, thought Anson and Spalding, was the perfect spot for the boys to sober up and work out.
All the boys are enthusiastic about it, and all want to go. I've written to a professor down there, and he's making arrangements to build a vat in which he can boil the whole nine at once. Boil out the alcoholic microbes, which may have impregnated the systems of these men during the winter, while they've been away from me and Anson. Al Spalding.
Rather than work out indoors at a Chicago gymnasium or play exhibitions in chilly weather against American Association teams, Anson introduced a most revolutionary training concept prior to the 1886 season. He took his team south for spring training. It was the first foray into the American South for a major league team, and remains, of course, one of the game's most enduring and endearing rituals. Anson selected Hot Springs, Arkansas as the site for his preseason conditioning, becoming the first manager to make the southern preseason journey an annual ritual. Marty Appel.
It was big news when the White Stockings trekked south, making the front page of the very first edition of what would become the Bible of baseball, the Sporting News, published March 17, 1886.
They needed a flat piece of ground. They found a goat farm there that they were able to lease for the 1886 season. They used it. They later bought that property, but as they went back in 1886, you know, what happens? They win the National League.
I played a game of baseball. I belonged to Casey tonight. The crowd was feeling jolly and the weather it was fine.
The biggest draw on that White Stockings team was the handsome, hook-sliding Mike King Kelly. Marty Appel of New York is author of the book Slide, Kelly, Slide, a biography of baseball's first superstar.
An oil painting of him sliding into second base replaced paintings of Custer's Last Stand at many Irish saloons throughout Boston. The song Slide, Kelly, Slide was written in his honor, and not only was it an important song in the American Songbook, but it was the first pop hit record that was developed after Edison patented the phonograph.
One of Kelly's pals was teammate Billy Sunday, an outfielder. Following a night out drinking with teammates, Sunday had a spiritual conversion. Eventually, he quit baseball and devoted the rest of his life to preaching against the sins of imbibing.
America needs a tidal wave of the old-time religion. America needs to be taken down to God's bathhouse and the hose turned on her.
He was as hard drinking as the rest of them, but one day he just saw the light, realized that religion was his calling, and swore into temperance and would never drink again. And when he went back to the White Stockings and said, boys, I have to share with you, I'm through with that life, I'm no longer going to be drinking, I have found the Lord and I'm going to be spreading his word. Kelly was the first guy to come forward and shake his hand and said, well, religion's not my strong suit, but I wish you well, and I think it's great what you're doing.
The White Stockings, later renamed the Cubs, came back to train in Arkansas 8 more times in the 1800s. It was during this period that Cap Anson became notorious for refusing to play against integrated teams, drawing a color line that would last until broken by Jackie Robinson in 1947.
I always tell people Cap Anson is the poster child for keeping African Americans off the Major League diamond. Well, he's really just one poster child. There were many.
He was a segregationist, big time. He did not want any blacks coming into the league at all.
An early effort to circumvent the unwritten color barrier was made by John Mugsy Mcgraw, a legendary manager once arrested by a U.S. Marshal for hustling tourists while pitching silver dollars into a saloon basket in front of the Arlington Hotel.
McGraw was described as this little poobah who is a very prominent figure around Hot Springs.
That's it. Good boy, good boy.
In 1901, McGraw came to town searching for talent for the Baltimore Orioles and heard about an exotic-looking African-American player who was working as a bellman at the Eastman Hotel.
Every day when he would get ready to come out and watch some of the other teams work out, some of the black bellhops would stop him and say, Mr. McGraw, you need to see a fellow we've got that plays on our hotel team. He is as good as any of these baseball players in town. His name's Charlie Grant.
McGraw concocted a scheme to pass off Grant as an American Indian named Chief Charlie Tokahoma of the Cherokee Nation. Author Phil Dixon wrote about the story in his book, A Harvest on Freedom's Fields.
At first, Mugsy thought he was a Negro and was about to tell him to move on when he noticed his straight black hair. He walked over and took a look at him, then asked if he wasn't an Indian. Toki said he wasn't anything else.
Well, Charlie Grant was a great player in baseball, was unique in that he was a fair-skinned man. I guess the term of the day might have been mulatto, because he had light skin.
Newspaper reporters would want to know where this full-blooded Cherokee ball player came from, so they contacted Charlie Grant's mother in Cincinnati, and they had her go along with it.
That ultimately didn't fly because Charlie Grant was a little bit too well known. He wasn't able to fly under the radar as much as McGraw had hoped.
The ruse was given up, and Charles Comiskey of the White Sox found out about it, and certainly lodged complaints about the possibility of his playing, and they weren't able to recruit him for the team.
Spring training conditions back 100 years ago were pretty primitive. Not only did they share a room, 2 shared rooms, but in the spring they would share beds. And now, of course, that would be absolutely unheard of, 2 men sharing a bed. It'll raise all kinds of questions.
Before Florida was invented, and most of the teams went there to train, baseball fans could stroll through the lobby of the Majestic Hotel on any spring evening and see many of the great diamond stars of the day engaged in prankish antics, playing cards, or just relaxing in the comfortable chairs. In Florida, if it rains, their successors have no mountains to climb and build up endurance, which may be one reason why baseball players of today are not as tough and long-lasting as they once were. D. Brown.
In those early spring training years, games could not be played on Sundays because of an Arkansas blue law that made it illegal, to quote the statute, for any club to engage in play of baseball in this state on the Christian Sabbath.
There actually were church-going ball players back then. They were ball players who didn't drink and didn't gamble and didn't whore around.
This church was the first Catholic church in Hot Springs, and just north of here is the famous Majestic Hotel where all the ball players would stay. And these guys would like to have a good time at night, but part of the Catholic tradition was to go to Mass regularly.
By the dawn of the 20th century, a belief in the healing powers of immersing in natural sultry water had swept the nation. With an advertising slogan of "We bathe the world," a bathhouse row sprang up on Central Avenue, with proprietors claiming their tubs could cure paralysis, malaria, alcoholism, and ailments peculiar to women.
There were so many illnesses and conditions that medical science couldn't treat. People were desperate for a cure or for relief, and they truly believed that thermal spring water would help them. And doctors all over the country advised people to come for not just the thermal water, but the whole curing of mind and soul and body that you could get in this relaxed, beautiful place.
1, 2, 3.
By 1910, 10 major league teams practiced in Hot Springs, including the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Red Sox, the St. Louis Perfectos, Cincinnati Reds, Cleveland Spiders and Indians, Detroit Tigers, the Pirates, Washington Senators, and New York Highlanders, who became the Yankees. Negro League teams that same year included the St. Louis and Leland Chicago Giants. And there were minor league teams including the Providence Grays and Toledo Mud Hens, all practicing and soaking in the bathhouses.
But they would start out early in the morning, hiking up on the mountains. They would come back in. There would usually be a morning practice, a scrimmage game. Then they would go and take one of the baths. I don't think that they truly understood anything other than it perhaps they felt like boiled out some fat and loosened up their muscles. And that's what they were looking for. They wanted to loosen up those muscles.
Maybe there was something in that torrid water that was piped into those old bathhouses. 22 teams that trained here won either American or National League pennants, including 11 World Series champions.
The normal course of baths was for about 3 weeks. You had 21 baths, one a day, and you'd have an attendant to wait on you. And there was a kind of a set regime that you went through, take about an hour and a half. You also had massage available afterward, something that a lot of players did. In the early 1900s, when they discovered that the waters were slightly radioactive, you know, that was an inducement to come here as well and take the baths, get a little bit more energy for your upcoming season.
The Red Sox trained here for all or parts of 14 preseasons, starting in 1909. Following the club by trainload was a rabid fan club known as the Royal Rooters. Their leader, Boston pub owner Michael Nuffsaid McGreevy, is often pictured in team photos, wearing a Boss Sox uniform.
There'd be arguments, break out in the saloon over baseball matters back and forth. And at one point he would slam his fist on the bar and say, "Enough said." And that would end the argument.
McGreevy and his men would sit in their own section in the stands, singing their theme song, Tessie. Author Charles Alexander, a retired history professor, lives in Ohio near the birthplace of one of the legendary names in baseball lore, longtime commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Alexander has written biographies of a number of baseball Hall of Famers, including the slick-fielding outfielder on those pre-Babe Ruth Red Sox teams, Tris Speaker, known as the Gray Eagle for his silver hair.
He played center field better than anybody ever had. And he had his own unique style of playing a shallow center field. So he was known to catch line drives in short center field and beat a runner back to second base to double him off. He actually completed several unassisted double plays from center field. In his time, and for a long time thereafter, even when I was growing up, he was considered the greatest center fielder of all time.
Can I throw harder than Joe Wood? Listen, my friend, there's no man alive can throw harder than Smokey Joe Wood. Walter Johnson.
The star pitcher on those Red Sox clubs was Smokey Joe Wood, a fireballer who won 57 games between 1911 and 12 and seemed destined for the Hall of Fame.
Joe Wood had an incredibly fast fastball. The only other player that he was compared with was Walter Johnson. Wood knew he was fast, they knew he had the potential to hurt people.
Wood writes that after a scary beating of Pittsburgh third baseman Bobby Byrne in March 1913,
there was a history of fear that he had about hurting a player like that. And it was something that he carried with him his whole life, not just in 1913, but after that. Even when Bobby Byrne played for 4 more years, even when Bobby Byrne had one of his great seasons in 1913, even when Bobby Byrne played against Joe Wood's team, the Red Sox, as a member of the Philadelphia Phillies in 1915. Joe continued to be afraid, to believe, in fact, that he had hurt Bobby Byrne so much that day that he shortened Byrne's career.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Whittington Park. Between the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Boston Red Sox.
no teams played one another more often in Arkansas than Pittsburgh and Boston.
Batting third for the Pirates and playing shortstop, Hannus Wagner.
The Pirates franchise player Hannus Wagner was an exceptional athlete who hit for power and average and dominated games with his base running. Said Ty Cobb of the Flying Dutchman, "He is not only a marvelous mechanical player, but he has the quickest baseball brain I have ever observed."
There is something Lincoln-esque about him. His rugged homeliness, his simplicity, his integrity, and his true nobility of character. Arthur Daly, New York Times.
He was stubby, he was strong, he was bow-legged, he was fast. He was up there with Ty Cobb as far as speed.
To stay in condition during the off-season, Wagner captained a traveling basketball team. In the winter of 1909, Hannus volunteered to teach some Hot Springs High School boys how to play on the hard court.
They really didn't know the rules of the game. They didn't know how to execute plays. And also, he would go to Hot Springs High School every afternoon and work out with the basketball team. Wagner went back. He sent back the uniforms that his traveling Pirate basketball team had worn the year before. He sent shoes and a couple of balls so that the team would have everything they needed to play the game. And to this day, Hot Springs High School still honors that gift with their school colors of black and gold.
At the zenith of the era, in the second decade of the 1900s, 250 professional ball players could be found working out in Hot Springs at any given time. Trolley cars made it easy to get around. There were movie houses and billiard parlors and horse racing tracks to entertain the players and fans, along with some quirky tourist attractions.
Well, they would definitely go to the Alligator Farm, which was on Whittington Avenue, close to the ballpark. It had hundreds of alligators, which didn't do very much, but were fun to watch, particularly at feeding time when they fed them chickens. They could go a little farther down the street to the Ostrich Farm, which was actually more energetic and exciting because they had races between ostriches on a quarter-of-a-mile racetrack. You could drive a buggy pulled by ostriches. Or you could go further down Central Avenue and go to the Happy Hollow Amusement Park, which was several blocks long and had elaborate hillbilly or fake country storefronts and costumes you could wear for comical pictures. There was definitely gambling. There were gambling clubs like the Southern Club, the Kentucky Club, the Texas Club. There was also a lot of prostitution. It was a wide open town.
It was wild. It was in the sense of it was majestically beautiful. But they had the casinos. They had the horse racing. The weather was invigorating for them. And the people, they loved the whole atmosphere.
Baseball was always a draw, with exhibition crowds packing the stands by the thousands. A new, livelier ball added to the excitement.
In the National League, baseball was introduced late in the 1910 season that had a cork center added to it. Previous to that time, baseball had been horsehide covered, wrapped in 2 different grades of yarn, hard rubber center. That was the so-called dead ball. Well, it didn't carry. If a ball was found up in the stands, park attendant or policeman would go over, get the ball from the fan, throw it back on the field, or the fan would throw it back on the field himself. Bat boy would take it, throw it, give it to the umpire, or throw it directly to the pitcher. The ball would stay in play. It wasn't at all uncommon for maybe 3 baseballs to be used during the course of the game.
Age is about mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. Satchel Paige.
Many of the top...
Whose voice was that? Satchel Paige. Anybody recognize that voice? That's Coach Mike Anderson. Coach Anderson grew up in Birmingham, and Satchel Paige was from Mobile. So when I'm picking voices for these quotes, I'm always trying to find one that will fit because the people that I'm dealing with are long gone. The next segment that you would see in the piece is about the Negro League teams. About the time the white ball teams moved out, the last full year that a white major league team, full team trained in Hot Springs was 1925. And that just so happened to be the last year Babe Ruth was allowed to go to Hot Springs. Because as you learn, they just didn't really want him going down there and getting all the trouble that he got into. But the ball fields were still around. Some Negro League teams like the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Kansas City Monarchs and the Homestead Grays, and great players like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige, cool Papa Bell, who was so fast that he could, what was the old story about? He could turn the light switch out and be back in bed before the lights went off, I believe it was. And the Negro League teams continued to go to Hot Springs sporadically all the way through really the end of the Negro Leagues in the 1950s. Also in the film, we go to Cooperstown, New York, because with only really one exception, all of the greatest of the great from the first 50 years of Major League Baseball, who made it into the Hall of Fame, trained in Hot Springs. Anybody want to tell me which player did not go to Hot Springs of those greatest of the great? He had a reputation for probably being the honoriest player who ever played the game. Ty Cobb. And why did he not go to Hot Springs? Well, because he was Ty Cobb, and he just figured his team ought to come to Atlanta where he lived and train there. That was Ty. 45% of the, to this day, 45% of the players who are enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York, trained or pre-trained or bathed in hot springs, including people like Roy Campanella, the great catcher for the old Brooklyn Dodgers, who would go down and try to lose weight. A lot of those black ball players would go down there and bathe in the black hotels and baths. Sandy Koufax, probably the last player that went for preseason treatment on his arthritic left elbow. Sandy, one of the greatest, if not the greatest pitcher of all time. And his elbow was just shot. And he went down to the arthritis hospital and got treatment on there. And there's a great quote by Sandy that says, if people who think spring training isn't important, have never thrown a baseball. I wanted to show you the very end, but I thought I'd stop here and entertain some questions. The version that's going on MLB Network is 45 minutes, and it has 6 commercial breaks in it, because you know it's a commercial network. The version that you're watching, and you saw a few things in this piece that will not be seen on the MLB Network broadcast, because this is a 57.5-minute version, the DVD version. And I do have some DVDs for sale. I just thought I might entertain a few questions if you have any about the story.
Did you get a lot of help from the Negro Baseball Museum?
Oh, yeah,
Did you get
I absolutely did. That's a great museum. I mean, certainly if you have the opportunity to go to Cooperstown, New York, you should, because it's just about, I mean, it's just such a great place to go. But you know what? The Negro League Museum in Kansas City, anybody been here? It's fabulous, and you really should go. It's great, isn't it? I'll tell you something about that. It is a smaller version of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. It is just as good. The exhibits are fantastic. The people there really know the story. And it's just smaller. But they were very helpful. The curator, Ray Doswell, I brought him into the project very early on. Phil Dixon, who you saw interviewed. In fact, I think Phil made a presentation in Rogers not too long ago. Anybody go see that? Yeah, he's really, really good. And people told me that he was really the quintessential expert on Negro League baseball. I'm actually going to present the film at some kind of a baseball conference coming up on April 1st in Kansas City. But that's a great museum, and they were quite helpful, absolutely. Yeah. Yes?
I have so many questions, but one is, what did you keep out of this? You know, with 57 minutes, what were the 1 or 2 parts that were just really hard to give up, but you had to?
Well, I'll tell you something. When I talked about the MLB version, the first version that we did was about, that's close to 75 minutes in length. And we just cut some things back, and then I had to cut some more stuff out for MLB. This is one of my teaching points with my students. Sometimes I'll watch something and I think, why did I leave that in there instead of taking that out? So I just have this philosophy that I would rather you guys want more than to get bored with it. And I'll quote Ken Burns, who, I've used this quote for years, maybe told it to you guys here. But you know, when Ken Burns came out with the Civil War series, and that was the one that really propelled him to national prominence, and I think he had, what was it, 9 hours or something, and I was at the PBS World at that time, and people were saying that PBS has lost its mind, giving 9 hours about the Civil War with a bunch of old still photos, and of course it just blew the lid off. And several years ago, there was a book that came out, and it was Historians Critique Ken Burns' Civil War. And all these historians are talking about, you might even have the book here, I'm not sure. All these historians are talking about, why did he do this, and why did he do that, and he should have left that out, and he should have put this in. And the last chapter, Ken Burns responds. And he says, you know, I worked on that film longer than it took to fight the Civil War. And he said, and I had 9 hours. I had 9 hours. Heretofore nobody ever fought. But I barely scratched the surface. If I have succeeded, I have encouraged people to go read more about the story. Go visit the battlefield. So let me get back to your answer. There was stuff I had to take out, of course. But I'm hoping that it will make you want to go read about Satchel Paige and Babe Ruth and Josh Gibson and Hannus Wagner and Lefty Grove, who credited his the resilience of his baseball career with those therapeutic baths. And perhaps, you know, because my Thunders were so nice to support me, you'll go down and spend a weekend in Hot Springs, drive around and stand at home plate at Whittington Park and look at the alligator farm way over there and imagine the Sultan of Swat blasting a ball into that. I ought to tell you how I did that scene. Yeah, I noticed you guys got a kick out of the ball splashing into the alligator farm. Well, I'll tell you, I knew that was a story that we wanted to tell and that we wanted to accentuate. So I've got a silent movie about that time of Babe Ruth. I think it's called Headin' Home with Babe Ruth. And there was another film, I found that in the National Archives. And I found some great film of Babe Ruth taking batting practice from, of all places, South Carolina Special Collections. I have no idea why University of South Carolina has that. And the alligator farm's still there. So we went over and took a GoPro, put it in a pole, stuck it in the water, and I had a camera looking down, and I had a baseball bat, and I stood back about 20 feet from where the ball was coming, and I threw that ball and splashed it. I missed my mark the first time, so we fished the ball out and threw it again. Well, the alligators are in there watching. And so the next time I hit my mark, and that alligator went over there and gobbled it. Well, the owner of the alligator farm said, yeah, you can go in there and film, but be careful because somebody threw a Coke can in there one time, an alligator ate it and killed it. So as soon as that alligator took that ball in his jaws, I thought, oh my God, I've killed him. It's the end of my career. And the owner's son, who runs the thing, went over and grabbed the alligator's tail. And he starts pulling on his tail. And there are people there, and someone says, why are you pulling on his tail? And he says, well, if I pull on his tail, he won't throw his head back. He's going to try to throw his head back and swallow that ball. And the guy's wife comes over with, you know those things that they pick up trash with on the highway, you know, these little poles with little pinchers. Well, she reached in there with that pole and grabbed the ball. And he's chalked down, wrestling that thing out. And finally, after a while, pulled that thing out and it smashed. But I am proud to say that no gators were harmed during the film. I do want to show you the very end of the film. It's kind of fun. Any other questions before I do that?
I was there about 5 years ago for the races. I didn't really know this story. I want to go back down there again this year. Is there any fields whatsoever that you take pictures of the actual field down there?
Yes. That's cool. Let me get down to...
What was the end of the story about the cork and the baseball? That just sort of left us hanging. I don't understand what the difference was.
That was they came up about the time Hot Springs spring training really took off. And Babe Ruth really took off as the great Babe Ruth. They changed the ball from a dead ball to a live ball. And the story is that the ball that they changed to back around, 1912 or whatever he said, was exactly the same ball that's used today. It's a lively ball. Thus, Babe could hit a ball 573 feet.
So if he'd used the dead ball, he wouldn't have gotten that far.
No. He might lead the league in home runs with 10 in those days. Ty Cobb just felt like, that's sissy ball. Ty Cobb being Ty Cobb. I'll show you the very end, and I'm going to set this up by telling you that we shot at Whittington Park, and one of the last scenes, a ball was hit, and it broke the lens. But I want to show you how we use that in the close of the film. I want to get back to your question about are there any fields. Whittington Park, there's a home plate there. But just behind the Arkansas Alligator Farm is Fogle Field. The backstop is gone, but if you walk up the hill or drive up the hill, you can see where the ball field was, because all they need to do is reconstruct a grandstand. And you know, they ought to. You know, I'm in charge of nothing in Hot Springs, but they ought to put a backstop there.
What's your favorite all-time baseball movie?
Oh, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of hard to beat Field of Dreams in the natural. Let me tell you something. I watched Field of Dreams the other day. And I'm watching it, seeing this movie, and cry every time the dad comes up for me. Every time. I'm a mess. And I'm watching it, and the dad's coming out of the cornfield, and he's talking to him. And then someone says, and I never knew this before, someone looks over and says, "That's Smokey Joe Wood." And I'm going, "Smokey Joe Wood?" I had no idea. I'll show you the close of the film, and thank you guys for coming out.
Sadly burned up in a full round of horse racing. Youth leaders can be found in the summertime playing at Old J.C. Park. On this very field on October 1st, 1952, a slugging teenager named Henry Aaron and the Indianapolis Clowns played one of 12 games of the Negro League World Series against the Birmingham Black Barons. And the story of baseball in Hot Springs is back. Historical markers connect to cell phones.
Team arrived in the Spa City in the middle of March 1886.
With stories about the legends of the game that made this place an annual destination.
And Hot Springs became the birthplace of spring training baseball.
On the walls inside the convention center is a permanent collection of vintage photos featuring rare and curious images, like this one of Trish Speaker sitting on a stuffed alligator.
For the average baseball fan, it's a great place to just drive, look around. It's a beautiful city too. It's a great place to visit. But for the experienced baseball fan or perhaps researcher, historian, there's a great deal of history. We're building on it every single day.
And Horace Bogle was the owner of the Phillies.
Author Don Duran and local baseball buff Mike Dugan were two of the driving forces in getting the historic baseball trail established. One of the sites is Fogle Field, where the likes of Hannus Wagner fielded ground balls.
It is a beautiful field today.
Yeah, it is.
And the Phillies only came the 1 year, didn't they?
One year.
Yeah.
And mainly because Horace Bogle got banned with baseball.
That'll do it.
Because he didn't. He said some things about the establishment that they didn't like. So
that'll get you banned.
You get the sense that it was once a great baseball field, a great park.
If the ghosts of baseball past are still here, they can be found at the site of Old Whittington Park, where the Babe hit his tape measure home runs. The ballpark disappeared generations ago, giving way to a timber company parking lot. The ruins of concrete bleachers stand against the side of a mountain where athletes hiked to get in shape. A home plate has been installed in the black asphalt where Pie Traynor and Rabbit Moranville hit and ran on a field of pale March green. Their spring hopes have faded into eternity. Their youthful images, frozen in colorless photographs, are bronzed and immortalized in halls of fame. Yet in their day, they were the first boys of spring.
Anyone who likes to go to Cooperstown should come here. They will be standing in the steps of the greatest players in the history of baseball.